Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we've got an explainer lined up for you that is, frankly, going to completely change how you look at your daily commute. We're going to break down the exact, absolutely terrifying sequence of a car collision, but we're doing it through a very strict clinical lens. And right off the bat, I want to say a huge thank you to Assistant Professor Dr. Farhad Mustafa Musa Atrashi, MD. The entire foundation of what we're unpacking today is based on his incredibly detailed clinical lecture. By using his insights as our anchor, we're really going to grasp the violent physics of a crash, and more importantly, exactly how our anatomy responds when the unthinkable happens. Zero point 0.1 seconds. We're talking about 1/10 of a single second. That's the entire window of time we are analyzing today. It's almost incomprehensible, right? I mean, by the time your brain even registers a loud noise or your eye finishes a single blink, this amount of time has already vanished. And yet, in the catastrophic event of a car crash, this tiny, minuscule fraction of a second completely dictates the line between walking away and severe, irreversible trauma. Every violent shift in kinetic energy, every structural failure of steel and bone is packed tightly into this tiny window. So it forces us to ask this very chilling question. What actually happens to the human body in the literal blink of an eye? You know, when we drive, we're usually pretty comfortably numb to the extreme physical forces at play. We're blasting music, chatting with our friends, totally insulated from the reality of momentum. But Dr. Farhad's clinical perspective demands that we strip away all that comfort. We need to transition from that everyday feeling of just cruising down the street to a microscopic, literally frame-by-frame breakdown of human anatomy colliding with unyielding physical barriers. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the stakes here, we basically have to abandon how we normally think about time and space. In this clinical look at impact, we aren't focusing on the emotional aftermath, and we aren't looking at crumpled metal from a safe distance. We're going right inside the cabin. We're treating the vehicle and the human body as one single combined system that is undergoing an extreme stress test. Dr. Farhad's clinical lecture provides us with the raw, objective data of what is, essentially, a biological nightmare. The whole foundation of our explainer today comes from Dr. Farhad's original clinical text, and this brilliantly illustrates a terrifying, chronological map of destruction. When you translate it and really break it down, you realize it doesn't rely on hype or exaggeration. It just gives us the raw timestamps and the massive forces that go with them. It asks a very direct question right at the beginning. If you know these exact data points, will you definitively wear a seatbelt? Well, let's look at the baseline data that prompted such an urgent question. The scenario Dr. Farhad outlines sets up a very realistic, everyday baseline. We're talking about a vehicle hitting a solid, stationary obstacle at 80 kilometers per hour. That's roughly 50 miles per hour. And we need to pause here for a second, because this isn't some crazy high-speed chase from an action movie. 80 kilometers per hour is a standard cruising speed on a local highway or a main arterial road. You probably hit this speed multiple times on your commute without even thinking twice about it. But when a vehicle moving at this completely normal speed meets a suddenly immovable object, the physical laws become absolute monsters. All right, let's start the clock. At precisely 0.02 seconds, just 0.02 of a second, the car's bumper makes contact and instantly crushes. But look at the sheer kinetic energy involved here. In this first barely measurable fraction of a second, the structure of the car withstands a crushing pressure that is 30 times its own weight. The vehicle is absorbing an unbelievable amount of energy, but the reality is it just cannot absorb all of it. So that sudden, violent deceleration is instantly transferred to whatever or whoever is sitting inside the cabin. Which brings us to the 0.04 second mark. Just 0.04 of a second in. Dr. Farhad notes, with absolute medical gravity, that the driver and the passengers are no longer just people sitting comfortably in their seats. They're instantly transformed into human projectiles. Because the car itself has stopped, but their bodies are still moving forward at 80 kilometers per hour. Each person is violently thrown forward with a massive crushing pressure of 2 tons. Just imagine the sheer literal weight of 2 tons localized entirely on a fragile human skeleton. Now, we are going to dilate time even further. We need to stretch out this remaining fraction of a second so we can observe the step-by-step destruction frame by frame. When you watch a crash in real time, it just looks like a single chaotic explosion of glass and metal. But clinically, it's actually a highly ordered, ruthless sequence of anatomical impacts. Every single hundredth of a second dictates an entirely new phase of trauma for the occupants trapped inside.
Let's move to and see how this builds across the timeline. We know that at 0.02 seconds, the bumper crushes, and at 0.04, that massive 2-ton forward launch begins. Right on its heels, at 0.05 seconds, the driver's body impacts the steering wheel with that exact same 2-ton force. At 0.07 seconds, the front passenger slams into the dashboard. At 0.09 seconds, the heads of the front occupants strike the windshield. And then, right at the 0.10 second mark, exactly 1/10 of a second, the rear passengers, who are also now projectiles, fly forward and violently join the front passengers in the impact zone. In literally 1/10 of a second, the entire cabin becomes a lethal trap.
Okay, I want us to take a deep breath and just pause for a moment to really absorb the timeline we just walked through. From the bumper crushing to the bodies launching, the intense chest impacts, the head strikes, and the rear passengers flying into the front, all of that complete devastation has concluded. But here is the craziest part. The clock hasn't even hit a single second yet. This realization sets up what I believe is the absolute most shocking, paradigm-shifting statistic of Dr. Farhad's entire clinical breakdown. So the crucial point is right here. Remember that still 90% of the first second is left. Let that chilling reality sink in for a minute. All of that severe anatomical trauma we just talked about, the 2-ton forces, the steering wheel impacts, the shattered glass, literally all of it occurred in just the first 10% of a single second. The violence of a collision is so blindingly fast that before the first second has even truly gotten started, the physical damage to the human body is already completely done. So, what do we actually do with this terrifying data? Well, Dr. Farhad doesn't just present this clinical nightmare to scare us, he presents it as a medical diagnosis that demands a very specific treatment. We have to transition away from the devastating physics of the crash and look at the medical mandate. Because there's only one proven biological solution to this trauma. It's a simple, mechanical intervention that physically prevents your body from succumbing to these unimaginable forces. These are Dr. Farhad's direct orders, based purely on the undeniable physics we just learned. First, fasten your seatbelts whether you are in the front or the back seats. Remember that 0.10 second mark where rear passengers become lethal projectiles? Yeah, that's why. Second, wear them on short inner-city trips. Distance simply doesn't matter. Hitting a wall at 80 kilometers per hour is completely identical whether you are 2 miles from your driveway or 200. Third, wear them on long road trips. And finally, Dr. Farhad explicitly states that sharing this information is quite literally a human duty. This brilliant breakdown completely destroys every common excuse people use. Wearing a seatbelt isn't just following a legal rule, it is an absolute biological necessity to survive the laws of physics. And that brings us to the final thought of this explainer. Now that you've seen the raw clinical reality, and now that you understand exactly what happens to the human body in a mere 1/10 of a second, the responsibility shifts over to you. The clinical data is completely undeniable. The physics are absolute. So, will you fulfill your human duty, buckle up every single time without excuse, and pass this critical knowledge on to your friends and family? I want to say a massive thank you again to Assistant Professor Dr. Farhad Mustafa Musa Atrushi, MD, for providing this vital clinical perspective. And thank you all so much for joining me. Be smart, stay safe out there, and seriously, always buckle up.